Hi, this is Karen White of Divine Time Astrology, and here is another portrait of a writer, very famous writer, William Somerset Maugham, if I'm saying his last name correctly. He's famous for The Razor's Edge, of Human Bondage, and he's written so many books and have had so many screenplays. I recommend that you look him up on Wikipedia. It's quite an interesting story. His life story is quite interesting. Now, let's see if he meets the conditions to be a writer. I'm sure he does, but we'll check. Okay, so in the Jaimini technique, we need to have the moon with, aspected by, or ruled by either Venus, Mercury, or Jupiter. So we see here is the moon in Taurus. So it's ruled by Venus. It's aspected by Venus and Mercury, because remember in the Jaimini technique, the fixed signs aspect the cardinal or movable signs and vice versa, except when they're right next to each other. So Taurus cannot aspect Aries, and Aries cannot aspect Taurus. Taurus is a fixed sign. Capricorn is a movable sign. So here is the moon, ruled by Venus and Taurus, aspected by Venus and Mercury, as well as by Jupiter. As we see here, Jupiter is in Libra, a movable sign, and so aspects Taurus. So he more than meets the requirement for the moon. Now, the other condition is he needs to have the third house for the hard work of writing involved. And we see the moon is in the third house by sign. We're not looking at the cusps here because the Jaimini technique is a sign-based technique. So we have the moon in the third sign from the ascendant. So that's condition 1 for that. And then 4, 5, the fifth house of creativity is ruled by the moon, and it aspects it too. The moon also aspects the fifth house. And then we need to have the ninth house for telling tales and teaching. So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that is Scorpio. And Scorpio is ruled by Mars. So we go to Mars, and Mars is ruled by Jupiter, so Jupiter is aspecting the moon. So we only have to take this through one dispositor in order for it to connect with the moon. Now, his Atmakaraka is Mercury. That is the self-producer planet. So we see Mercury here with Venus. That alone can make quite an artistic person, a charming person, a person who can express themselves well. And these two planets aspect the third house of communication. Of course, writing is a form of communication. And then we look here in the Navamsha, we look to see what sign his Atmakaraka is in. The self-producer planet, Mercury, is in Virgo. It's with Venus, it's aspected by Mars and the moon. Now remember, in the Jaimini technique, the mutable signs, or the dual signs, Pisces, Gemini, Virgo, and Sagittarius, aspect only each other. So again, we see the moon aspecting Mercury and Venus. So now the sign of Virgo indicates the need to develop his talents and his abilities. And of course, this is what he did. He spent his life writing. Even when he was studying to be a doctor, he would still write in the evenings. And when he wrote his first book, it did so well that he quit being a doctor and took to writing full time. Now, the other characteristic of Virgo, when it is the sign that the Atmakaraka is in the Navamsha, it can be difficulties in relationships. And he had problems in his relationships. I guess you could say he was bisexual. He had relationships with both men and women, and he was married for a while, for about 12 years, to a woman and had a child. But the marriage was unhappy, so they divorced. And he had male companions. I think he had a male companion for quite a long time, many, many years. And then when that companion died, he later had another male companion. Now, this can be seen. I just want to be clear here. You cannot always see homosexuality really clearly in the chart every time, because I've seen some charts of men who are gay and they didn't have these characteristics. So, but generally speaking, you can see this when the Sun and Saturn are together. Saturn is a neuter planet, and the Sun represents our masculine side, and so is therefore particularly important in a man's chart. Yeah, the Sun is in a great enemy sign here, and it's with its enemy Saturn. So Saturn with the Sun really can diminish the man's experience of his masculinity, and it can often indicate a person who is gay. Mercury is also a neuter planet, and his Upmakaraka Mercury is in a Saturn sign, so a neuter planet in a neuter sign, though it is with Venus, and Venus is female, and it's aspected by the moon, which is also female. So you can see that in his birth chart. I don't think that it's particularly important to his writing, but it was important in his life, because in the time period that he lived in, it was not something that people could be open about. He basically had to hide it. And so therefore, it would have been a fact of life for him that was difficult. And everything that a writer writes about tends to be somewhat of a reflection of himself. And at one point he said that his novels and his own life story had become so intermingled that he really couldn't tell the difference between whether it was fully fiction or if it was autobiographical. Now, my favorite book by him was The Razor's Edge. It was influential in my life, actually. It had something to do with my own spiritual evolution. And if by any chance you haven't heard of him, check him out on Wikipedia, and it's very likely that if you haven't read one of his books, you've seen a movie that he was involved in making, either because he wrote the screenplay or it was a movie made from one of his books. So this is Karen White of Divine Time Astrology, and until next time, good night.